Welcome to a parallel project training APM Project Management qualification podcast based on the APM Body of Knowledge 6th edition. You should be using this in conjunction with our e-learning, study guide and potentially a tutor-led course. For more information, please visit www.parallelprojecttraining.com.
Hello, my name's Paul Neighbour and welcome to another Parallel Project Training podcast. Hello, John.
Hello.
With me today.
Hi, you're right, everybody.
Very good. And we're doing, working our way through the APM Project Management qualification, and we're looking at a new section which is on relevant legislation applicable to projects. This is a new part of the... I think this is quite a good improvement, personally, don't you? I think
they always had health and safety in there, didn't they?
Yes.
But they've added contracts, employment, and environmental regs as well.
Yes. And I think it's actually part of the project environment, really, understanding the legal constraints that you have to follow. And I expect most industries have their own legal framework, don't they? So if you work in financial services, for instance, they have particular regulations to do with compliance, or if you, in drug trials, they have their own rules that you have to follow.
The railways have Office of Rail Regulator.
Yes, that's right. That's right. But the ones that the APM have pulled out as being generic are health and safety, contract regulations, employment regulations, and environmental regulations. So I expect these apply to most topics. So should we just take these in order? Health and safety, law and regulations. So what's the main...
You basically got the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974.
Health, Safety, Work and Environment Act.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it also covers welfare and...
oh, gosh. It's all about making
sector.
sure work's safe, isn't it? Making sure that people are safe at work and making sure the public's not injured as a consequence of work.
That's right.
So basically has a number of requirements for you to follow.
It covers everyone, doesn't it, really, if you think about
everyone
it?
at work.
Everyone at work, yes, that's right.
Or
visiting work.
Yes, or involved in work activities, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's the Health and Safety Commission sort of decides the direction and the regulations and so on, and the Health and Safety Executive are the people that you're going to be talking to if something goes wrong.
Yes.
They inform and enforce, don't they? So they have a communications activity and they also have an enforcement activity. So
yes. Yeah.
you hear about the Health and Safety Executive inspectors being on site in the event of an accident. So they have to make sure things are safe for employees and members of the public. They make sure there's a clear reporting structure, so that people, so you do understand what you're obliged to do if something does go wrong. Yes. Or in some cases when it doesn't have to go wrong, to still do reporting.
Yes.
It involves if people are off sick for long periods of time and so on and so forth. Guidance on the interpretation of the law. So you have to provide guidance to your employees how they would interpret the law. So what does it mean? You know, you have to provide certain element of safe instruction to them and training and so on.
That's right.
You have to make sure that proper risk assessments are done and all the rest of it. And there's also codes of conduct with specific businesses. You know, like nuclear will have codes of conduct.
Yes, the most common ones are the CDM regulations.
CDM, that's
which is specific for construction, which basically says how the health and safety legislation should be interpreted for a construction environment.
That's right. The more dodgy what you're doing is, the more regulations you've got. Basically.
The more rules you have.
Yeah. So you need to be aware of things. You have to make sure there's a plan in place. You need to make sure that risk assessments are carried out. You need to make sure that people are properly trained.
That's right.
You need to make sure there's open, honest disclosure. So if something's looking a bit dodgy, then you tell somebody about it. You have to take regular reviews.
Yes,
so
that's right.
Continue reviewing the plans and what's actually happening. Stress is quite important. I mean, as a project manager, you're quite often putting people under stress to get things done. Can you finish that by Friday, sort of thing? Okay. So you need to be aware that can be a problem. You have to provide proper safety equipment, and you have to make sure that sort of environmental issues are addressed. So, you know, disposable of recycled waste and that sort of thing within any environment.
Okay, is that part of health and safety legislation?
Well, you said it was. You just said
welfare.
It was health and safety. Welfare.
Okay,
all right.
So they have to provide welfare. So they have to provide toilets and stuff. I can tell you a funny story. I remember, gosh, when I was a kid, years and years ago, I think I was probably 15. One of my friends was a plant hire guy, and it was probably actually in 1974. actually going back. So it was ages ago. And he said, it's brilliant, this health and safety legislation, because now they have to hire portaloos for the workers. He said, I'm making so much money hiring out portaloos. Up until then, he didn't bother.
Didn't worry about it,
so it's his welfare.
Yeah, I think.
So those are the 5 things, aren't they? I think.
Well, there's about 8 or 9 there. Yeah.
So it's quite a nice little question. So I think from the APM's point of view, they want to know that you don't understand the whole framework of health and safety, but you understand the principles that you have to follow.
I think it's important that you don't just think. Don't think that it's just construction or railways or buildings or whatever. Health and safety applies to everybody.
Yes.
So even in what would appear to be a fairly safe office environment, you're still bound to do a certain element of scrutiny over the environment.
Well, every office has that notice on the wall, doesn't it? Actually, if you read that notice on the wall, it just sets out those 5 duties of the employer, as they say.
And the other thing to remember is don't think that it's only the employer's got duties; the employee's got duties as well. So you can't kind of fiddle around. You can't let the fire extinguishers off at Christmas, for example. You've got to obey the rules. You can't take protective guards off of machines because it's easier.
Interfere with equipment provided.
That's right. If you're told to wear a hard hat, you can't decide whether you're not.
Follow the instructions of the employer.
That's right. So and if some misfortune should befall you, then and you haven't been following the rules, then you're probably on your own, really.
Yes.
So hopefully it won't happen, but if it does, just be careful.
So let's move on to contract law. That's probably one where project managers get quite involved in day to day. So, what do project managers need to? You're a bit of an expert on contract law, aren't you, John? You're more of an expert than me.
No, there's nothing worse than a barrack room lawyer, is there?
So let's do
2 years of commercial law about 20 years ago.
You?
Yeah.
You've served you well ever since. Yeah. So let's do what's a contract then.
Well, a contract's basically an agreement between you and somebody else, or a number of other people.
Yes.
So you've basically arrived at an agreement. Like any agreement, it doesn't have to be written. If you don't write stuff down, then the problem you've got is proof.
Yes.
If you've got an agreement with somebody, then the chances are you're obliged to do something, and so are they.
Yes.
Even if all they're doing is paying you, you still have an agreement.
So there's an offer, acceptance, and a consideration.
Yeah, I mean, contract. Legally there's differences. I don't really want to get bogged down in all that because it's really quite specific, isn't it? But you need to know who the parties are, who you're doing business with, who is the legal entity you're doing business with. What are their relative responsibilities? What are you going to do? What am I going to do? When are we going to do it?
Yes.
To what standards are we going to do it?
Okay.
And when am I going to pay you?
How am I going to pay you?
How am I going to
What's
pay
the mechanism
you?
for
That's
payment?
right. Yes. What happens if something goes wrong? Are there any damages? Are there any consequences for loss? That sort of thing. Things like IPR. Who owns stuff?
Who owns what's created by the project? So IPR is intellectual property
rights. That's right. And
so
copyright.
When we do a design of something, who owns the rights to that design when the project's finished? Does it belong to the client? Does it belong to the the contractor, the person who did the design?
Yes. So that's right. IPR and who owns stuff until it's paid for.
Okay.
And that might not be a problem. But I mean, if say for example you've got a big building site and one of your contractors goes bust.
Yes.
Who owns
the
any
work
materials?
Yes.
Who owns the work?
At what point does ownership transfer?
That's right. So that sort of thing just needs to be fairly well understood. And there's all sorts of precedents, and the specific contracts you experience in different industries will vary, and some of them will be more prescribed than others.
Yes.
There's things like JCT contracts in building and NEC contracts and standard forms of contracts, all of which will have specifications. If you work in defence, you'll have DEFCONs and so on.
Yes.
So it's a good idea. Don't turn yourself into a lawyer. If you need advice, go and find somebody who's knowledgeable and expert.
Yes.
Undoubtedly, you'll end up paying for that advice, but then you can rely on it, and to a much finer degree than you ever would from listening to a podcast or reading a study guide. So, I guess the advice for all of this stuff is to make sure you go and ask the right people.
Yes. And know when you're at your limit, really.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. No, being aware that there might be a problem is all you need to know.
Yes.
Practically.
And then tell the organisation.
How you deal with how you deal with it.
And then tell the organisation.
Most people that work for a big organisation are usually protected to a large degree from some of the nastier bits. And then you get employment law regulations. Project managers really are the line managers, are they, for people? They tend to be employed by an organisation. You get them into the project. Most projects are. Paul's looking at me with a furrowed brow.
Yes, it varies.
Yeah, it does vary, but
varies,
most projects that you run are internal, or you're using people that work for the business.
Yes.
Yeah, anyway, so from a line management point of view, the project managers are rarely the line manager of the staff. From a health and safety and pastoral care point of view, which is a good thing.
Yes. Well, you can or cannot be, really. I mean, but you still need to know what employment legislation says, really, don't you?
Yeah, the sorts of things a project manager might come into contact with are things like working time regs, getting people to work overtime to hit that milestone, that sort of thing, or setting up a project in a porter cabin without sufficient welfare facilities.
That's right.
Making sure that all the computers are checked and things like that. And you need to be aware of sort of discrimination. You can't discriminate on the basis of sex, gender, race, sexual orientation, age, or disability. When you assemble a project team, you might need to be aware of that, depending on the size and the nature of the business that you're in.
Yes.
Things like Data Protection Act. You might come into, if you're doing a big software project.
I'd imagine that'll be a big focus for you.
Yeah, payroll projects or something like that would be a problem. Where you write a payroll system and you're assembling personal data, and maybe one of your staff's taking it home at the weekend on their own laptop.
Yes,
that's right. How's that work?
That's right.
Is that declared? Is that something you need to be? You might not allow it to happen, which is absolutely fine. But I mean, are you comfortable that all of that data is properly and adequately protected? Things like
most projects will have a HR advisor who will come along and advise them on any HR issues.
I think if just awareness again. If you know you're getting involved in that stuff, you go and find the person that can help.
Yeah,
the data protection officer normally in a business will tell you.
Yes. It's quite dynamic as well. HR legislation changes much. Of all these, I follow on LinkedIn. There's a lady who every time there's a new bit of HR legislation, she posts a little snap up, and it's really quite frequent that some new bit of legislation has changed around.
And you find things that kick in. So a bit of legislation that was passed 5 years ago is enacted today.
Yes, that's right. But it can, I think, on IT projects, it could be quite, because it often involves record keeping and tracking that sort of stuff. So
and things like Freedom of Information Act and anti-competitive laws and EU procurement regulations all potentially have implications. What were the contractors that you use? What were their names? What were their ages? That sort of thing.
Yes, that's right. Timesheets.
So you might find yourself having to sort of defend that sometime in the future. So storing stuff away for things like freedom of information. My experience is most people that are in those sorts of organisations are already pretty well trained on all that anyway.
That's right. And then environmental legislation. So this is a growing important area, really, isn't it? Just minimising the use of resources, the impact of projects on the environment in general.
I really like this idea of prevention, reuse, recycle, recovery, disposal. I really like that. I mean, if you can avoid using scarce resources, then it's better to do so.
Yes.
If having used them, you can reuse them as they are.
Yes.
So you use a motor in a different application. And I think you see some of the TV programs where some really ingenious use has been, washing machine motors, now a scooter or something.
Yes.
If you can't reuse it, you recycle it.
Yes.
Which I think is good. So you kind of put it back in and it gets recycled.
The best example of that is waste, spoil from a site.
That's right.
So you
see these big concrete crushers,
is that
don't
reuse?
you?
Sorry, that's reuse, I expect, isn't it?
No, reuse is as is.
Oh, as is it?
Yeah, so you use the component without changing it.
Okay.
Well, I suppose technically it's reuse. Yeah, but recycle is where you take the material and you convert it into another form.
Okay, so taking waste from a site and just moving it somewhere else might be reuse. But if you then take the concrete and you crush it
That's right.
to make it into aggregate, you could argue that was recycling.
Yeah, I mean, your local builder, when he knocks a wall down, he'll probably bury the bricks in the foundations, And I suppose, let's not go there. But recycle is where you recycle stuff, and recovery is where you burn it.
Okay.
Oh, so you obtain some other form of energy or something from it.
Generating.
That's right.
Another.
That's right. So biomass boilers, that sort of thing.
Yes.
So you cut down trees because they're unwanted, and then you
So this is energy from waste and that sort
you
of
recover
stuff.
energy from them. Yeah, that's right.
Energy from waste.
That's right. And then finally is disposal, which is landfill, basically.
Yes. The last option.
So I think if you're going to answer a question on this, it's quite a useful little.
Okay, structure for thinking about the implications of what you'd have to consider.
So I suppose you could talk about describe the primary environmental aspects of environmental law or something like that. And I quite like those 5. I found those.
I like the fact you've got
helpful.
this please note in bold, big font.
Yeah, well,
please note this guide.
I'm just thinking about our insurance policy.
It's not an exhaustive guide to HR law or procurement or contract law.
Listen to us whittering on for 10 minutes. He's not going to turn you into a lawyer.
No, please consult a professional in the relevant topic.
My daughter's just done 4 years legal training now.
Yes, and she's not qualified.
She's not qualified, yeah.
Yes.
So, anyway.
Yes.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
so that's good stuff.
So we haven't actually seen any questions on this area yet, but I'm sure they will.
Well, I think we've seen health and safety ones, haven't we?
Yes, the
health and
duties
safety.
duties
Describe 5 key duties of a project manager with relation to health and safety.
And I think the rest will be on that same theme, really. It's five environmental considerations that a project manager might take in the design of a project. Brilliant, good. That was excellent. Thank you.
No worries.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast and found it informative. To order a study guide, e-learning, or a tutor-led course to go with this podcast, please visit www.parallelprojecttraining.com.